Welcome, everyone, to episode 11 of the Way, a RUDIS Wrestling podcast with your host, Cary Kolat, and myself, Matt Dernlan. And Cary, we're already to the end of this book. You know, it's amazing that we've been doing this for almost 3 months now, but it seems to have flown by, and we're at the final chapter of Switch, a book by Chip and Dan Heath. And throughout the last 3 months, we've been really discussing the nature of this book, and the crux of this book is about, how do you enact change within your team, within your organization, or your place of business, and going through the different steps and different processes of that. I think this has been, by and large, we've kind of tied this into the sport of wrestling, which was, kind of the intent when we started this. But it's been a fun couple months talking with you and getting your perspective, getting your insights, and how this relates to not only yourself but your program down at Campbell.
Yeah, has it been 3 months? We've been doing this long now. I didn't realize that.
Pretty
quite some time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we haven't put too many people to sleep if they're following along. But yeah, but we had I've gotten some good feedback. I actually ran into a few people at the NCAs. I forgot to tell you, they were like, hey, they really they enjoyed the podcast and were reading the book and had their staff reading the book. So that was cool. I mean, we're helping some people, but yeah, final chapter. And like I said, this book I read, Matt, years ago, and it was given to me. And then as we went through it, I was rereading it again. And it was really important for me in the structure of Campbell from where I took the program over and where we're at now. And I say we because it's always your staff. And I feel like we put together a great staff. And now it's just kind of follow along. This book really does, I felt like, has helped me be a better head coach. And now this last chapter, again, is kind of going back through everything. But, I read, there was some few things in here I read, but, there's a part in this book, and I've said this to my guys a lot of times. And when I was an athlete, I used to feel this way. Like, and this book goes back, to make change, you got to start acting a certain way, talking a certain way, being a certain person. Before you even get there. I always told people, like, I every time I was a national champion before I ever had the plaque. I was an Olympic champion before I had the Olympic gold medal, which I don't have an Olympic gold medal. But when I was competing, like, man, you couldn't tell me that I was an Olympic champion. You couldn't tell me I wasn't going to be one. And with my guys now at Division I level, I tell them all the time, just because you don't have the plaque doesn't mean you're not a national champion. I just knew I was going to do it someday. I think if you ask anybody, all these guys who are competing, they just know it. And in fact, now, I mean, I tell people all the time, like, the wrestlers now are so much better than when I wrestled. They're better trained coming out of high school. Their confidence level, to some extent, the confidence is good. Sometimes it's like over the top confidence, but that's just a sign of a progression of our sport. These guys are really sure of themselves, and it shows when they step on the mat. I mean, we've seen how many freshmen now, just come in ready to go and ready to compete. And but that part in the book, I could personally really relate to is, walk a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way. And that's how you start changing and become what you want to become.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, to touch on, the most fundamental thing that you said, technique has evolved, training has evolved, recovery has evolved. Every part of the sport has evolved and changing, and for the most part gotten better, and that's just the nature of life. That's the nature of sports. It's the nature of everything, right? But fundamentally, the one thing that never changes, where things start, is the belief, right? The belief in yourself. And you can only establish belief by doing a certain pattern of things over and over and over again till that belief becomes real. And it becomes, that seed of belief starts in your mind and spreads through your heart and spreads through your body. And it just grows and grows and grows and is reinforced by replicating things over and over again. And I know this chapter was kind of like a conclusion and kind of touched on a lot of things, but fundamentally it focused on the process, right? I know they touched on that in this chapter. That's one of those mantras that's thrown out there more and more, in athletics, embrace the process, but it really is. I mean, they're cliches for a reason, right? When people talk about the process and, the process of belief and growing and changing, it's fundamentally the same on a number of levels. And it's just learning how to replicate that, fine tune it, tweak it along the way. And as you grow year by year, it's introducing incremental changes throughout the growth of your program. And I think
Yeah.
that's the one great thing that this book stressed. I mean, patterns are there to be followed. Patterns are there to be replicated, and that's kind of the building block. And the beauty of this book is it's just built on itself chapter by chapter and introduced, not significant things, but minor changes along the way.
Yeah. So you said a couple of things there. You said process, and then you said patterns is what sticks with me, right? So this is where if I'm a coach and I'm listening to this, or I'll give you an example like a CEO. He goes into the business, he goes to the board, and he lays out the 5-year plan for the company, right? And next year he's going to come back and he's going to lay out that 5-year plan again, but now it's tweaked, right? Because he was, it's either a year further into it. So really what they start to tweak is they probably start to tweak year 4 and 5, right? This was the initial 5-year plan. We've done a year. Are we in line with that process or that growth pattern that we need? And then we tweak the end. I felt like I did this, like I laid out my goals my first year with my guys. And I said, this is what we're going to do and accomplish in year 3. I did 3 years. We're going to do this in year 3. And then we came back next year and I laid out the goals again. And I had adjusted, and what I had laid out for year 3, I was now in year 2. And I felt like we were on track to do that. And then there was another goal in year 3. And that's the process part as the head coach and the leader. And you have setbacks. And sometimes you have to be okay with adjusting it and maybe taking it down a notch, setting the bar just right. So they got to work for it. It's going to hurt to achieve it. But it's in the realm of possibility. And you're not living in dreamland. And then people can see a tangible growth in that. When they see tangible growth, then they start to follow along even faster, and it gets faster and it gets faster, right? The change starts to happen quicker and quicker, exponentially. And then as an individual, you still, in our sport, you have to change yourself as an individual, right? And it's the same thing. So you said patterns in there, which I always tell a guy, specifically in terms of training and the mental thought process, have things that work for you and keep improving on them. And then always understand that don't allow yourself to get too comfortable. And part of that pattern is finding a day where you can be uncomfortable in your training, uncomfortable a few days during the week, and then back to that repetition, back to those things that are solid, that build that muscle memory, make you a great athlete, make you a great wrestler. And then again, you come back in, you got to get uncomfortable again. But I think that's the biggest thing where you see people drop off because we go, it's a mindset. We want it now. There's too many people that just want it now and aren't ready to say, this is going to take me 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And, for me, every speech to every freshman that comes into my program, it's where are you going to be 5 years from now? I'm not focusing on year 1 in March. Where are you going to be in the 5 years you're going to be? How are we going to finish? What kind of wrestler are you going to be by the time you leave this program? And truthfully, if you get a guy thinking that way, they're usually accomplishing some. If it's a middle of the road kind of kid and you can get them thinking that way, then they can start accomplishing things second, third year. If you have a higher level athlete coming out with, then the pattern's different. Where you're going to be in 5 years, and it's higher expectations as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, one of the things that you touched on just at the front end of those comments that I think we've touched on it a little bit, but I think it's something worth discussing a little bit more. And you were talking about being adaptable, and it's funny, as leaders of programs, we're the ones initiating and enacting change, but sometimes we're our own worst enemies. We're talking about change here. And one of the biggest things with change is learning how to be adaptable within the process. And I think, when we want to introduce, we've got this vision for how we want to enact change. Sometimes we get so tied into what we believe and the way it should be done that we can't step back and have that, the fortitude or the wherewithal to understand, hey, maybe I need to tweak this. I don't need to ditch it or throw it out with the bathwater, but there's something that's not quite working here. I'm onto it. I think it's working, but myself or my staff, we might need to step back and adapt and tweak the process while we're in the midst of it. And I think that's the hardest thing to do, because when you go about integrating or initiating change, that's a vested effort, by not only you but also your coaching staff, to talk it through, to vet it, to implement the change. And the hardest thing to do when you're in the midst of it is to step back and say, hey, maybe I was slightly off. Maybe we need to tweak this here or there, to get the outcome that we need. And I don't think we've necessarily talked about that a lot in this. And I don't think the book necessarily talked about it, but I think that's a really, really integral thing. While you're in the journey to enact change, you've got to have the flexibility to actually adapt and to adjust on the fly a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'll tell you, a big part of this comes is lineup changes. There's times in your mind. I know I'm guilty of it. I've been guilty of it many times. In my mind, I have a way that I think it should run. I know who should be where. And you look at it, and then all of a sudden some guy says, look, man, I need to make a change in my weight. And I used to get really frustrated, because I would, I'd go back and I'd start looking at, all the different things, and looking at all the other people and the size of the guys or whatever there might be in terms of weight class. And then you got to look at the guy and say, okay, well, if he's at that weight, can he compete the right way? And that was something in my younger days I had to get past. Now you have to be patient, and you got to let your organization, as you would say, your organization or your athletes, have some say. If they don't have any say, like I don't believe you can lead a program. You have to have leadership where they're willing to follow you. Like, that's the biggest thing. Are people willing to follow you? And in the process, if you give them a voice where they can, voice some concerns and have some honesty, then I think you get better leadership, and I think you get better athletes and a better team. And then you got a team that can change quicker for you in that process, and that's important in taking a back step. I know I've done that a couple times in my coaching career where we felt like we need to make a change, but you got to be careful because you hit sticky points. Like, if you really truly believe something is going to pay off and work, then you got to hold to it, and you got to keep them, moving forward with it. Even when you take a couple steps back sometime. I go back, remember, Matt, I told you when I was at UNC, when I first got there, I trained these guys all summer long. The program was like 57th when we got there, and we trained all summer, and then all of a sudden these kids had these high expectations, and they shook hands and went out and got their butts just kicked in the first event of the season. And, then their mind starts spinning out of control of, why did I do all this work? But then you're back to the process. We knew that was the right thing to do. We knew we had to put a lot of work in. We knew we had to get a lot of repetitions in. And really, we didn't see the outcome of that until this end of the second year. It was like the end of the second year of training these guys and this same group of individuals where we finally started to see it come through. And if you take out that summer and all that training that day, well, maybe we don't see it to the third year. And that's the stuff that, you have to know when to make a change, when it's right to adjust course, or when it's, we got to stay on course. And then that's when leadership comes in and really sitting your guys down again and getting them on board, saying we're moving in the right direction. I know you don't see it because your mind's in the win-loss column, but get out of that mentally. But the improvements are showing through.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that Chip and Dan stressed in this chapter is, like, as a leader, as a coach, one of the things that you've got to be cognizant of, and you've got to continually do, is reinforce the changes that are being made, reinforce the positive things that are going on, because we tend not to recognize that as athletes, as coaches. A lot of times it's easy to focus on the things. It's easy to pick out the things that aren't going right. I mean, but when you really break it down to your guys, I'm like, guys, that's really the most obvious thing, right? When things aren't working right, And, so it's easy to get negative on yourself, and it's easy as a coach to jump in and point out the things you're not doing. But really, one of the things you got to be cognizant of is like reinforcing the positive things that are going on, even if you're not necessarily getting the outcomes. And to your point, to what you were saying, you have to be adaptable, but also you got to know when to hold the line, right? And dig in and say, we're holding the line. We're digging in here. We're not budging. I know fundamentally, without a doubt, what we are doing is correct. So we're going to be adaptable when I think it needs to be adaptable, but fundamentally, the change we're trying to enact and the change we're trying to make within you as an individual or with us as a team or a program is, collectively, you got to know when you've got to dig in as a group and say, no, hey guys, we're holding the line here. I don't care if we're not getting the outcomes, you're not getting the wins, you're not getting the performances and the outcomes that you want right now in this moment. But I'm telling you, if you hold the line and we dig in together, and we really embrace what we're trying to do, the outcome is going to be there. I can't promise you that it's going to be today, tomorrow, next week, or even this year. But I'm telling you, if we hold the line together, a great thing is going to happen. And in case in point, I mean, that, those fingerprints and those reinforcements are all over your program. And, I've appreciated your willingness to really give an inside perspective of everything you've had to go through at Campbell for the last 5 years, because, you've continually had to hold the line and reinforce things and stay steadfast to the things that you believe are true and meaningful for your program. And you're seeing it. And, it'll be great to revisit this and maybe have a conversation, 5 or 10 years down the line when you have that first group of guys come back to Campbell, just like you've talked about with some of the other alumni that have come back and they recognize change. It'll be interesting to see these guys that went through the first 5 years of your program to come back in another 5 years, to really see how things have continued to evolve and to change.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm interested too to see where it's at in a few years. It's great to watch something like kind of grow. I'll tell you though, I'll go back and I said this when we got to that chapter. So, we're in the last chapter and we're kind of doing some recaps of everything. But, and what you just touched on was even when things aren't going right, there's always positive, right? There's always something that you can take and show where the gains have been made. But my favorite, if you only read one chapter of this book, it is the bright spots. It is absolutely that chapter, the bright spots, for me is the biggest one. And now, my program's a little bit older. So I've got guys now who are freshmen coming in, and then I've got these guys who are moving into their juniors and senior years. And we've seen growth in these guys. And, those guys have really been right now the leaders of my program who are making waves and winning bouts and, going to nationals and getting wins now. And, but they're great now because that's your bright spot. When somebody comes in and, they have a problem with their weight or they have a problem with, training or academics or this doesn't work or that doesn't work. Now you have, it's great as a coach to have 5 or 6 guys and say, well, it works for so-and-so, he makes his weight fine and this is what he eats. This guy, has got a 4.0 and this is what he does. And he's wrestling and training the same as you. I mean, that's the thing. When you have those foundations to go back to or those bright spots in your program, then you can really go back and it can help you like just continue to build your program. And so for me, the bright spots is my favorite chapter. And it like continually, like just, I feel like there were some really genius moments in that chapter of the book, especially the guy, like I said, he went over to, Vietnam, I believe, and, corrected in $1 billion problem, just with a couple million, which was unbelievable to me. And so that really drives it home for me.
Yeah, and I think the other great thing that Chip and Dan did in this book is a lot of times when you read leadership books, and business practice books, they talk about the high achievers. But the one thing that Dan and Chip did in this book, a lot of the examples they gave, these weren't the CEOs, they weren't the presidents, they weren't these big leaders in the company. It was people that took responsibility of their own areas developed a change, developed an outcome. They didn't look for the people above them, right? They always looked internally and introspectively at themselves, and they weren't saying, "Hey, my boss is going to solve this problem," or "I'll wait until the CEO comes out, with the new quarterly reports about how we're going to change or we're going to adjust." It was a lot of the examples that Chip and Dan gave is like, no, it was the manager, it was a supervisor, it was the soup kitchen person that took ownership and accountability for their area, and they didn't wait for change to happen. They made the change themselves, and they saw it through. So, it's a simple thing that's probably reinforced in a lot of areas and a lot of teaching points, but don't be reliant. I mean, the big thing, that I would try to talk to my guys about is like, hey, don't wait for me to make the change. If you're always waiting for me to set the bar, or set the expectations, I'm always going to do that. But if you're waiting for me to do that, eventually you're going to hit a glass ceiling because you're looking for someone else to do something for you. And that's never going to happen. You've got to surround yourself with the right type of people, the right coaches, the right training partners, the right environments. But, fundamentally, the change is always going to start with you. It's always going to start and stop with you. And if you don't have that internal drive, that internal accountability, if you're always looking to the coach or the captain or this or that, you're never going to truly reach your full potential. And so having, learning how to get that introspection going on, that accountability where, where you're looking for guys to bring change for you. Like, hey, coach, can we do this? Can we do that? I mean, those are really the exciting parts of coaching and change. And so, yeah, that was a big thing for me is like, they weren't, shining the light on these rock stars. These were normal people doing extraordinary things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, no, just the case studies were great for me. Like, you're right. It wasn't a business book where you just sat down and it was one highly successful person after the next. And that's where, I think people need to see how, somebody who just starts out as average in whatever they're doing, and then how but their mind isn't average, and they find ways to break through and find ways to get it done. And I mean, it's what we always say. I always feel like tell people national champions, you ask them, they'll tell you they'd have been a national champion anywhere they went. You didn't need all the bells and whistles because there's always enough to get it done if you really want to be successful and you want to make a change in your wrestling or make a change in your program. You can make it happen. I go back to my first few years. I mean, our mantra with the guys was we do more and less. We do more and less. Now, since we've done some things, we've been rewarded by administration with a new facility with a bigger and deeper coaching staff than we've ever had, and a deeper roster. And now our program has gotten to the point where I'm excited about my next year, where we've got depth. Before we didn't have any depth. Now we have guys, we have overlap in our program where, hey, the goal was always to get too deep. And it took us, we're going to be hitting our sixth season and my sixth season here. Now we're going to finally be too deep at weights where if this guy can't get it done, the next guy is going to be just as good and ready to get it done. And, that's a successful program. That's part of it is getting more and more people to buy in and say, if I come here and wrestle and if I get in the lineup, I can win. And that's what the great ones do. Great programs have that. And so we're starting to get there where I feel like I don't feel if our starter goes down that we're not ready. And that's all been part of this process.
Yeah. So what else? That kind of sums up everything that we've been going through. I think, this episode, we were able to kind of recap some of the things that, some of the talking points throughout the way over the course of the last 3 months. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add, but I know for me, this was a good culmination to the book. One, I got to thank you. I mean, you're the one that turned me on to this book. It's been as much of a learning process for me as hopefully some of the listeners, but this has been, really enjoyable for me, and I think this is kind of what we wanted to do. When we were talking about, at the outset of the way and what we wanted to do here is like, it's fun to talk about wrestling. It's fun to talk about results, but I think, what's meaningful in the sport of wrestling, and what you enjoy as a coach, what I enjoyed as a coach, is always giving back, and, I had some of the similar experiences at NCAAs, and those are the most meaningful parts of the sport, when someone says, "Hey, man, this was really insightful. I was, thanks for touching on this point. Thanks for bringing this conversation to the public. I don't, I don't think we reinvented the wheel by any means, but it was fun going through this, and a lot of times when you're reading these books, it's like when you go out and do a clinic or something. I tended, when I was doing clinics and camp, to learn as much about the move I was showing as much as I was showing the kids that I was showing it to. And that was a kind of the beauty of Switch. It kind of like reinforced a lot of the things that, that I thought and tried to introduce during my coaching career, but kind of reinforced in this book. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to our next one. We haven't decided what we're going to do, but excited to continue that conversation, and hopefully, in the next week or so, we've decided on our new book, and can start on the next episode of The Way, and what that new book's going to be.
Yeah. No, I wasn't sure I was going to play out either, like I said. But I think we got, there was a lot of people that responded to it, a lot of coaches. And so I'm glad we can help in any way we can help. But yeah, that's the next one. I don't know what we're going to read next, but if somebody's got any suggestions, fire them out. If they know of a good book that would make sense for high school coaches and youth coaches, or anybody out there that fired at us. But it's been fun, Matt. I appreciate it, man. And hopefully we get started another week or two and get something else going.
All right, Cary, I really appreciate it, and look forward to catching up soon here.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Okay, we'll see you.